The story of a bird teaching Cain how to bury his brother in Surah 5 comes from Mishnah Sanhedrin.
Okay, so we heard the argument that the Quran chapter 5 actually comes from the Mishnah Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish Talmud, which is basically the Jewish commentary on the Old Testament. So what is the problem with David Wood's claim? The problem with David Wood's claim is not only did he plagiarize this argument off of an Orientalist from the 19th century, but the problem with this claim is that the problem with David Wood's claim is that the Mishnah Sanhedrin actually dates to the 9th century, at least 300 years after the Quran chapter 5 was revealed and after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. So there's no evidence that this Mishnah Sanhedrin was in Arabia circulating in Arabic in the 5th and 6th century, because it didn't exist until the 9th century, 300 years after the Prophet Muhammad's death. Thus, the author of the Quran couldn't have copied off the Mishnah or the Talmud, as the Mishnah and the Talmud, especially the Babylonian Talmud, was not finalized or was not in its final form until after the rise of the Quran and after the rise of Islam. The Mishnah and the Talmud was redacted and edited, and it was in its final form in the 9th century, at least 300 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. So the story actually, or the source of the story actually postdates or comes after the Quran. It didn't come before the Quran. And the reference for this dating of the Mishnah Sanhedrin in the Talmud to the 9th century is found right here. The introduction to the Talmud in the Mishnah, 1991, page 332. Also see Tanhuma, Yahudi, Encyclopedia Judaica, volume 15. So the date of the Mishnah Sanhedrin came in the 9th century, at least 300 years after the Quran, or after the Quran chapter 5 was revealed. Again, David Wood is being inconsistent, and he's using a fallacious argument. He's committing the genetic fallacy, and he's being inconsistent because even the New Testament Gospels, I think the Gospel of Matthew actually quotes from the Talmud and the Mishnah, according to some Christian scholars. So, he's being inconsistent. But regardless, there's no evidence that this Mishnah Sanhedrin existed in the 6th century. It came in the 9th century, 300 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad and after the completion of the Quran, 300 years later. The conclusion here is that David Wood is making things up, or he's ignorant about the dating or when the Mishnah was in its final form. The Mishnah Sanhedrin, in this case, actually postdates the Quran by about 300 years. Thus, the author of the Quran couldn't have copied off the Mishnah, because the Mishnah came 300 years, at least 300 years after the Quran chapter 5 was revealed. And another issue is that there's no evidence that this Mishnah Sanhedrin was circulating in Arabic in Mecca and Medina. There's no direct evidence for this. This is all assumption by the Orientalist that David Wood is plagiarizing off of, and by David Wood. So we just got to look at, in order to refute these claims that the Quran copied off the Talmud or the Mishnah or the Jewish commentary of the Old Testament, etc., is you got to learn the dates of when these books were finalized and redacted and available in book form. And in this case, the Mishnah and the Talmud came after the Quran. They came at least 300 years after the Quran. And there's no evidence that they were circulating in Arabic in Arabia, since the language of the Mishnah and the Talmud was in Hebrew, Aramaic, etc., etc. So it wasn't translated into Arabic, and it certainly wasn't circulating in the area in the Arabia. Again, if you read the Quran, chapter 11, verse 49, it says that the people around the Prophet Muhammad didn't know these biblical stories. So if the Prophet Muhammad was really copying, then the Quran, chapter 11, verse 49 would have been refuted right there. But it's been proven over and over that that the sources of the Quran can't be found in Arabia. and the people in Arabia didn't know the biblical stories that the Quran chapter 11 verse 49 states. So if the Quran chapter 11 verse 49 states this, then it's probably true.